I've been craving some Warhammer 40k action recently, having started listening to audiobooks and studying up on some surface level lore in the last few weeks. I decided to jump into a game called Warhammer 40,000 Mechanicus. So let's talk about this XCOM-like small scale turn-based strategy game and if it's worth a buy at this current point. We're going to change it up and start with an overview of the game, covering the basics and giving you a good idea of what to expect. You'll be starting off with 2 tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, more of which are unlockable later in the game, and you're heading onto a Necron tomb world where they'll begin to awake. Every time you enter a mission, you'll be taken into a blueprint sort of view, moving your units through different rooms which consist of either Necrons to battle, an event that will provide you with choices, some of which can benefit you, others which will make the rest of the level noticeably harder, or glyph rooms, which are similar, in which you must correctly identify the Necron glyph in order to either be rewarded or punished. Once you enter a room with enemies, you'll be thrown into an XCOM style battle where you can position your initial units in a small area, identifying where the enemies are. You'll also be provided with secondary or cannon fodder units that can be selected at the beginning of a mission and deployed during an encounter, helping to soak up hits instead of your tech priests, and being able to deal some more damage. Your tech priests can be leveled up with skills and gear in between missions, helping to make them a lot more powerful, and also a lot more specialized in certain ways, such as melee, medic, or ranged combat, to name a few. Now let's jump into the graphics. I was playing the game at max settings on an RTX 3080 at 3440x1440 Ultrawide. Now the game is noticeably not a AAA game in most ways, which is completely fine. You can tell the models are relatively low poly, and the textures are slightly low as well, but 99% of the time you'll be viewing everything from a decent distance away, meaning you'll almost never be up close to a character, unless you zoom in to get a good look or a cutscene is playing, of which there aren't many of at all. If you do decide to zoom in, you'll be greeted by some pretty aggressive blur or depth of field, which makes it a bit hard to view the game up close. Now, despite what I've said until this point, I think this game looks pretty great. With the effects, to the excitingly designed mission levels, to the main ship where you deploy into missions, they all feel very unique and quite Warhammer 40k, which is what we're all after in this type of game. Atmosphere and immersion is up next. Now with the type of game this is, atmosphere and immersion isn't really a top concern. Basically being a top-down game with lots of menus, health bars and objectives, whilst controlling multiple units in a turn-based combat system, doesn't scream immersive. But what it does feel is addictive. Every time I completed a mission, which could often take up a decent amount of time, I wanted to jump straight into the next one without more than 5 minutes to upgrade my tech priests in between levels. Now despite not being incredibly immersive, it does feel, as mentioned before, very Warhammer 40k. It definitely feels like it fits excellently into that world, which I guess is atmospheric and immersive in its own way. Then we have the music, sounds, and voice. Starting off with music. Dude, the music in this game goes hard. I was surprised how into the music I got. Entering a tense battle with what feels like unbeatable odds against an army of Necrons, and then this wild music starts pumping in the background. You get hyped up to start putting Necrons straight back into their tombs. It felt amazing. As you can tell, it's relatively loud and intense. Whenever I had the game paused to get some food, I could hear it pumping away on the other side of the house. But I loved listening to every moment of it. Then we have sounds. The sounds do the job. They don't feel all that insanely powerful or mind-blowing, but they portray the weapon being used or action being performed well enough. Some other sounds, such as simply equipping or unequipping gear to one of your tech priests, feel so much more impactful and powerful than most other sounds in the game. And now, voice.
I sailed the void for 1,000 years. I fought the war in heaven.
When it comes to actual voice acting, there is very little in this game. The only English voice acting throughout is from certain boss or leader type Necrons. All members of the Adeptus Mechanicus speak in a robotic type language, which honestly sounds bassy and pretty phenomenal, despite resulting in you having to read all their dialogue yourself. The dialogue can sometimes feel a little boring to read at times, or unnecessary, but it's not the most important thing in the world in this game. Now we move on to a category called game setting and location. As mentioned, the game takes place on the Necron planet Silver Tenebris, where you'll fight your way through various Necron tombs, which hold all variety of Necron enemies, traps, and sometimes treasure. You'll also make base in between missions on your ship, which looks awesome and is covered in tech, where you undertake missions, customize your tech priests, and more. Altogether, the setting can at times feel a little bit limited, but it looks pretty awesome and felt very thematic. Now let's talk a bit more in depth about the gameplay. Let's start off by saying your first handful of missions in Mechanicus are hard. You're going to have to fight tooth and nail and really think strategically in order to overcome them. Starting off with just your 2 tech priests and a couple of servitors is a rough start and might make you struggle. I only played through the game on normal, and even then, it felt difficult. Once you're able to make it through these levels and begin unlocking and upgrading more tech priests and units, the game gets easier and easier. I ended up only failing one actual mission in my whole time playing, whilst never even struggling against any of the later game boss fights. Now, despite being an XCOM-like game, there's one big thing missing: accuracy. In this game, if you or your enemy is close enough to take a shot or a swing with melee, then it is guaranteed to hit, even when the projectile appears to travel straight through a wall or a set of stairs, even when it felt ridiculously unfair. This most often happened with certain Necron enemies called Death Marks, which turned out to be the absolute bane of my existence through the entire time playing, as they could literally shoot you from anywhere on the map as long as they had a line of sight, which often wasn't even the case. If you managed to land a hit on them, then they would phase shift to another part of the level and enter Overwatch, which meant if any of your characters moved, the Death Mark would get a free shot on them. They would often phase shift far enough away that you couldn't reach them without moving, meaning unless you could hit them with a one-hit kill move or get around behind them, they were the most frustrating enemies by a long shot. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. Your tech priests will also revive if they die during a battle, unlike XCOM, unless you're playing on certain modes or difficulty levels. The game also has no cover system, as your units or the enemies can't crouch down behind cover to make it hard to hit them. One important resource within missions is cognition, which can be earned through scanning cognition points, killing enemies, or a few other methods. Cognition is used for many weapons in order to attack, everywhere from 1 cognition for a melee attack to 4 or 5 for some of the more powerful ranged weapons. This often means that you can't use your ridiculously OP weapon every single round unless you have an excellent way of collecting cognition at all times. Cognition can also be used for extra movement during your tech priest's turn and to call in servitors or other extra units during a battle. When deploying on a mission from your ship, you'll often be able to choose from a bunch of different missions ranked in difficulty from easy to praise the Omnissiah, and each will provide you with the enemies you'll encounter and the rewards you'll get if successful. The game also has a form of timer, which counts up to 100, which is when the entire of the Necron army will be awakened. This goes up more and more depending on how long you spend on each mission. I completed the game before it hit 100, so I'm not fully sure what happens if it does. Blackstone will be your most important resource, which is collected during missions for killing enemies, scanning terminals, and completing missions. It's used to upgrade your tech priests and select your fodder units at the beginning of a mission. Altogether, the gameplay loop is satisfying. Once you learn the flow of the game and what everything does and is used for, it gets pretty addicting. Now we'll move on to the content within the game. As usual, we'll be using my own playtime as well as the website How Long to Beat. Personally, I ended the game with about 14.5 hours, which was me playing through the game once and completing the final boss earlier than I needed to. Looking back, I probably should have done a few more missions before completing the game, but I was scared to let the meter hit 100%. According to How Long to Beat, the game should take around 18 hours for the main story, up to 30 hours with main and extra content, and finally 41 hours for completionist. I think if you aim to play all or most of the missions, and especially if you play the game on a harder difficulty, you should be pleased with the amount of game provided. There is also a DLC for the game called Heretic, which I don't currently own, but I'm happy to review if you want me to. Now we move on to performance. Like I mentioned, the game was played at 3440 by 1440 on an RTX 3080 at max settings. From everything I noticed or experienced, I had zero issues or bugs throughout the game, without any glitches or frame drops, and the game ran pretty much perfectly for me. Now, some brief story. Magos Dominus Faustinius, I probably butchered that, the head of this Adeptus Mechanicus cohort, sends tech priests to begin exploring the planet of Silver Tenebris, resulting in a Necron army beginning to awaken on the planet. From then, you basically have to fight Necrons to help put a stop to this world-ending awakening. The story isn't too bad, but I found it had very little intrigue past kill the Necron overlords and don't let them revive their army. And now, the verdict. The game costs $42.95 Australian dollars or $30 US, but goes on sale for around $9 Australian dollars or $6 US, meaning the game is less than a half price game even at full price, and sale price brings it down to unprecedented levels of low. If you've been or are currently craving an actual good Warhammer 40k game like I was, or if you enjoy turn-based XCOM style games, or even if this game looked good to you at all, then I'd say it's definitely worth checking out. Now, if you don't really know anything about Warhammer, or if the idea of it really hasn't appealed to you before, this could still be a fun entry point, but if you don't enjoy or never found yourself interested in this type of turn-based strategy game, then you might not found the joy that I, and from what I can tell, many others have in this game. I hope you all enjoyed this Warhammer 40k Mechanicus review, and remember to let me know if you want to see a review for the Heretic DLC, like and subscribe for more, and catch you later.